Good evening and welcome to another episode of aPolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is Kian Jabour and as usual, I am your host this evening. We have a very serious topic to discuss today that is absolutely no laughing matter, and that is the Venezuela controversy that is currently grappling this nation when it comes to our borders integrity. There is currently an ICJ matter ongoing in which both Venezuela and Guyana have made claim to the Essequibo territory, and that matter is currently in court and being dealt with as we speak. Nonetheless, a new development has come within the last few weeks, which is something called a referendum. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to quickly introduce my guest here, Mr. Timothy Jonas, being one of the most foremost legal minds in this country. I know you're a very modest person, and you may not accept that title. I know many of you out there, like myself, think of you as somebody that can give at least a rational spin and understanding of what our current situation is. So to look at things on a legal perspective before we get into how Guyana and the government is managing this situation, or a conversation on what could or should have happened, how about I first touch on the legal side of what is currently ongoing? Maybe you can give us a synopsis very quickly and briefly as to what is occurring in the ICJ at the moment between Guyana and Venezuela, and then touch on the referendum that, first of all, I think you need to explain what a referendum is, and then explain what Venezuela is doing with it. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. And as you say, Kian, this is not a subject to be taken lightly. It's not a subject for vitriol or superficiality. It is something that we need to be concerned about, and we need to discuss intelligently and as informatively as we can. This is serious. So, first question, I think, is the right question. You surprised me with it, but I will do the best I can. Now, every government acts on behalf of its people, whether in reality or in theory, whether they're a dictatorship pretending to be a democracy or a sovereign monarchy. They represent their people. And in a democracy, which Guyana is and Venezuela pretends to be, the people elect them at elections time. And until the next elections, they have the power to represent the state, the nation, the country, on behalf of the people. Now, the reason that's important is that there are tiers of power, there are levels of power. And I'll give you the example that we have in Guyana, which I think everyone is familiar with. You got a law, any ordinary law. You mustn't kill, you mustn't steal, you mustn't speed on the roads. Those laws are passed by Parliament, and Parliament exercises the power to pass those laws by a majority. So everybody in Guyana is familiar with our 65 members in Parliament, and the majority of 65 that we had to go to the CCJ to find out is 33. And 33 people sitting in Parliament, once they all agree, pass a law, even if the 32 disagree, because all you need is that majority, more than 50%. Now there's a higher tier of law called the Constitution. Most provisions in the Constitution require a larger majority, so you need a 2/3 majority to change the Constitution. So that's an even higher tier of law. And then you have what really is the highest tier, which is when you refer to the people, you go back to the people to ask them to approve or disapprove a law or a proposal or a resolution. And that is a referendum. So you go back to the people with a proposal. We want to make this change, that, to use a Guyana example maybe, the Chancellor and the Chief Justice should no longer be appointed by the President with the agreement of the Leader of the Opposition, but should be appointed by a majority of sitting judges. And you go to the people, and if the people agree to that, that's the highest tier of approval you can have. Now, I don't know if what the legal structure is in Venezuela, but in any democracy, that would be the gist of things. So when Maduro says he wants to hold a referendum, what he is doing is he is itemizing a list of proposals, of resolutions, that he is going to the people, and the people will come out to vote yes or no on this list of resolutions. And the referendum in question here appertains to control of Essequibo. So at the highest tier of decision making of the country, questions are being asked of the public about whether Venezuela should exercise control of Essequibo. There's a breakdown in this system, because the truth is that at the level of the salt of the earth, well-intentioned, ordinary man and woman on the road, most of us are shepherded through our lives. Most of us don't have access to real information. Most of us take in information that's made available to us by radio, by TV, by newspapers, and most governments make use of that fact by selling us propaganda wholesale. So that it is very easy, and politicians do it all the time, we in Guyana know. Just read the Chronicle newspaper. It is very easy to use a form of media to put propaganda to the reader, to encourage him to a point of view that is inaccurate. And if enough people begin to believe that point of view, you can get a referendum on almost anything. That's why it's so dangerous, because I promise you this, Venezuelan people are not evil people, bad people, or different people from us. The only difference that a Venezuelan citizen has from a Guyanese citizen is that historically they're Spanish, they speak Spanish, and they live in Caracas and we live in Georgetown. But every single one of them firmly believes, viscerally in his soul, in her soul, that Essequibo should belong to Venezuela. And they don't believe that because it's true. They believe it because that is the propaganda that they have learned from the time they were born, in school, in university, from their politicians, from their parents, from their teachers. And guess what? Every single Guyanese believes that Venezuela does not get Essequibo. That Essequibo belongs to Guyana. Every single Guyanese believes that, equally viscerally. Why? Because we have learned that in school from our teachers, from our parents. We are the same. What this therefore boils down to is a referendum is going to take place in Venezuela. And that referendum will be met and approved by Venezuelans who are honest and well-intentioned and have been sold a lie for their entire lives through a propaganda machine of media, newspapers, radio, and truly believe what they are saying. And they don't care. And that is why it's dangerous. Because this doesn't have good versus evil. This has a propaganda machine that has led well-intentioned ordinary citizens to a firm, inexorable, and wrong point of view against Little Guyana. That's why it's dangerous, and that's why it's a problem.
All right. I have a question, and I think it's going to lend a little bit to the legal side of what a referendum is. If this referendum is done in Venezuela, and the Venezuelan people vote for the Venezuelan government to annex Venezuela, to take Essequibo, for the Venezuelan government to take Essequibo. My question is, aside from the public imaging, because one of the things we do understand is that there is elections upcoming in Venezuela, and the government is looking for any sort of tool or mechanism they can to drum up support. But what I would like to ask is, if this referendum does happen, is there a way then, and it comes out as a yes, the people have said that the government need to take Essequibo. Is there a way that the government does not take Essequibo? Is there a way that, is there anything, what is the mechanism then to stop, if there is, to stop Venezuela from taking Essequibo?
Okay, that's an important question, because we have to draw a big distinction between white-collared people sitting down at their desks signing pieces of paper and what happens on the ground when people in camouflage wearing bulletproof vests and carrying guns do what you've just called an annexation. They're two very different things. Now, I don't like your expression annexation, because I don't believe that is part of the referendum. The referendum uses language that is very careful. The referendum, and we have to be specific about this, because if we are casual in what we are saying is being proposed across to the West, we can run into trouble, because we can escalate it and make it larger. And we certainly do not need to escalate and make larger this problem, which is already front and center for every Guyanese. The referendum speaks to enlarging administrative control of Essequibo, giving citizenship to people born in Essequibo, ID cards, and managing the administration and that kind of thing. So the word annexation implies a military takeover, and that's not what this referendum talks about. This referendum talks about taking administrative control and exercising an influence. It is very dangerous, but Venezuela has said, and in fact it said as recently as a couple of days ago in the ICJ, that it is a peaceful country and celebrates its peaceful history and the peaceful nature of the Caribbean and South America, and does not plan to be the party that breaks that. Now, that is something that, to me, the Guyana government should have jumped on and published and thrown back at them and made much of, rather than me just seeing that as a side note. Because although it wasn't said as the central point made by Venezuela, the fact that they said it, to me, is something that we have to rely on. So that's the effect of that. You see, the one chance that we have is to make it plain that, legally speaking, as far as international law is concerned, and as far as the legal obligations of states, of nations are concerned in international law, we are in the right. Mm-hmm. Because the 1899 arbitration that Venezuela insisted on, and that in which Venezuela appointed two arbitrators, unanimously decided, including the two arbitrators appointed by Venezuela, that the Schomburg line of demarcation showing the western boundary of Guyana as we know it is the correct boundary. And that has been the case, that has remained that way for 100 years. Now, arbitration is a process that, if two nations agree to arbitration and agree to be bound by it, that's it. International law says that's it. And that has been it in Guyana between Guyana and Venezuela for 120 years. So everybody knows there's a plaque up on the Roraima Mountains at the point where Brazil, Venezuela, and Guyana converge, where that plaque having been installed there by Venezuelan, Brazilian, and Guyanese teams working together to acknowledge that this is the point where it converges. So if legally we are right, then legally is the way that we have to advance our cause. And we have been doing so. So after the Secretary General of the United Nations decided that the use of his good offices, to which Venezuela and Guyana had agreed, was not producing the result he wanted, and used his discretion and made the decision, which Venezuela and Guyana had agreed, that upon that eventuality, his decision that he's not making sense with the mediation, that he can refer it to another body for determination. When he decided to refer it to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, again, in international law, because Venezuela and Guyana had agreed, that bound the two countries to agree to the jurisdiction, and adhere to any decision of the International Court of Justice. As long as Guyana continues down that road of arguing its legal position based on the agreement that was reached between the two sovereign nations 120 years ago, that is our best course. But it is not without dangers that need to be avoided. And those dangers don't lie in whether we're right or wrong or whether our position is justified in international law. I'm satisfied we are in the right and our position is justified in international law. But having succeeded in getting the ICJ to find over Venezuela's protests that it has jurisdiction over Venezuela because Venezuela agreed to the arrangement back in the 60s, and because we know that the arbitration is binding and that the grounds that Venezuela have, legally speaking, are tenuous, are thin, that some 60 years after the arbitration award, somebody said that there was fraud and that kind of thing, and Venezuela jumped on that. They haven't been able to present any evidence. I don't think they'll ever be able to present any evidence. So our legal position is strong. But we have to be careful not to find ourselves on the back foot because we say something or make some application or do something that allows the Venezuelan propaganda machine to divert attention from the areas where we are strong. And this is what concerns me, you see, because it takes me back to the point that Guyanese know about. We have for so long been focused and embattled in our tit-for-tat local politics, Afro versus Indo, PPP versus PNC, that we have lost sight of what's important, which is competence, integrity, systems that work. Now, I hear people in Essequibo, and they're worried, they're afraid, they don't know what's happening. They don't know how serious the situation is, they don't know what the threat is, they don't know if it's a physical threat or an administrative threat, they don't know. And I'm not seeing that there is anything happening to reassure them. And I, speaking for myself, am not satisfied that the government has done enough to inform its citizens, to take a position that gives comfort, to say this is what we have done, this is what we propose to do, these are the options available to us. I haven't even heard the government say, which to me is critical, that we mustn't escalate the situation by our rhetoric or by scaling up or by our treatment of Venezuelans or response to Venezuelans in Guyana. We mustn't do anything that allows the bigger bully to the west, against whom we cannot fight in a real fight. We mustn't do anything to escalate the situation, to increase the temperature, to give them an excuse to say, look what these Guyanese are doing. Now, anyone who's listened to the ICJ proceedings sees that there's a lot of rhetoric there, and there are a lot of cross-accusations, and the tone from Venezuela invites a suggestion that temperatures are going up. We have to be calm about it. You know, a retired army officer, a good friend of mine, someone who I have a lot of respect for, points out that if we have a debate in our white-collar, paper-pushing society that we are accustomed to and we know, we have a debate and everybody goes home. And if you have a quarrel in a rum shop or a bottom house, the quarrel might escalate to shouting, but usually everybody goes home. In a gunfight, you have a winner and you have dead people. And we cannot have a gunfight, not with Venezuela. So any talk about soldiers and police and presence and escalation and anything like that, we lose. Our strength is in the legal position that we know the arbitration award was made validly after a due process insisted on by the Venezuelans, participated by the Venezuelans, and in international law, they don't have a leg to stand on. And that's where we have to go.
All right. All right. I completely hear your point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. I'm going to I'm going to speak, and please allow me, because I was going to say I was going to speak as an average man, but the truth is, nobody other than maybe the government, and I hope the government has the real time situation that's occurring on the ground, on the border of Guyana and Venezuela, or within the various communities in and around the Venezuela the Essequibo territory. So the first thing I'd like to point out, and I think this is critical in having this, because, and you mentioned it, not enough information exists. All right, we have a situation that a whole country is becoming extremely tense because we don't know what is happening. I'm going to reference back to the 2020 elections, in which every day, every step of the way, a press conference was held, or somebody went live or something like this, explaining what is going on, explaining play by play what is happening. Now, I know that, and I'll be the first to say this to everyone, this is much deeper than that. This is now a controversy and a potential escalating situation that lives can be lost, and people need to be a little bit more strategic and tactful in the way they go about discussing these situations, and the government more so. As you have said, the entire idea should be to keep peace and calm at all times, no matter what. And I agree with this. I'm on board. I definitely think, like, at any point in time, anywhere in the world, peace should be the first and foremost goal. So what I also want to be is a little bit of a realist in stating that because of our lack of information, we don't know what is currently going on. And because of that, we are finding ourselves in a little bit of an anxious and panicked mode in society. I bring this up, people might say, well, how is this relevant? Because, I mean, businesses start to slow down their spending. People in the Essequibo region may become a little bit more fearful, a little bit more anxious, a little bit more guarded. What we've seen from the government so far is they have recently released videos today of the police in various communities. They've let it known that we have put a larger police presence in the Essequibo communities, in the populated areas in Essequibo. These are all in the news. This is what the government has said already. We saw a press conference today by the chief of staff, in which he said, we will stand ready to defend Guyana. We have watched, within the last few weeks, we have watched the president of the country go onto a stage in Essequibo in a military attire. Now, this is also coupled with the fact that we have been watching, and again, through social media, because information travels much faster. I know you used earlier the examples of how information is fed, but now with social media, it's not always filtered information. It's not always what the government or the propaganda machines want to feed to us. Sometimes we get other types of information. Sometimes we get the personal person, standing around pointing cameras. And that, again, is very unfiltered and raw. So what you get there with that is the feeling that more is occurring, because as Guyanese all around the country, anytime you go onto social media, you're watching videos circulate over and over and over, to the point where I guess I'll post it on my social media a little bit later, because I can't ask them to put up videos now. But the Venezuelans just had a huge parade in Venezuela, I'm not sure what part, with thousands of people on the road wearing, I guess their version of Essequibo is we own, and the map of Venezuela with the Guyana, with the Essequibo aspect, with the Essequibo territory. And then there were some that just had the Essequibo territory by itself. And this is what is circulating around social media at the moment. Now, and then again, through the government's mechanism of putting out information. So now my question again, is when it comes to, and this is a very complex and multi-tiered situation, when it comes to one, easing the mind of the Guyanese citizen, and two, instilling confidence in the Guyanese citizen that there is a plan. I have to at some point in time ask myself, what is the government's position on ensuring the confidence and making sure that the Guyanese people are protected? And because that is what is on the mind of every Guyanese right now. And I hear you when you say, we have to look at peace at all costs. I am with you. I am with you. But at the same time, as my references, as my example is at all times, if I won the lottery, I would have to put plans and contingency plans in place to make sure my home and my family are protected. And this is what the Guyanese are not feeling right now. So my question to you is, what more does the government need to do? What more can they do? And what more should they do?
Right. Now, if the bugbear, if the big issue is the manipulation of people's views through information, through propaganda, the point that you make about the advent of social media and the fact that most people access information and misinformation through social media is one that needs to be considered and considered seriously. Our government has become master at disseminating false information and using trolls. You got trolls on your show to spew garbage and inject red herrings and sidetrack people and with all kind of foolishness.
Create narratives. Yeah.
So they're there already. But here's the thing, and this is what the danger is that needs to be dealt with, and this is where our government has come up short. I mentioned in terms of information, giving information. But because of social media, everybody has a soapbox. Everybody has a platform that every individual is now empowered to disseminate information. And what that does is it means that there are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of possibilities for people to spread lies, people to spread their own propaganda. And we have seen it. I saw a fake ad about GDF conscripting people and drafting people into the army. Turned out to be fake. The GDF had to publish something to say it was not so. I've seen other videos mocking our GDF, other videos suggesting that there's an escalation and an increased armed presence here and there. The problem is that if the government does not take control as they should have done from the inception and create their platform where anybody can go to get the latest information and the latest knowledge, the vacuum of information that is left by their silence creates a space for the trolls and the harmful folk and the people who have nothing better to do and the people who want to incite to put false information in there to escalate and raise the temperature. And that's what we're seeing. So again, it's easy to say when the circumstances aren't serious that we deserve what we get. And now the circumstances are serious, and let me say, we deserve what we get. Because this is a matter of pure competence. Anybody looking at this must be able to say that a competent organization would ensure that there is a space, there is a platform that anybody by a click can go and get the latest update, the latest news of what is going on, where they can go for help, where they can go for information, what the status is in the ICJ, and again, repeatedly over and over until we're tired of hearing it, that we have to be calm. Venezuela have said that they have no aggressive intentions, that they're a peace-loving nation, that we are a peace-loving nation, that our legal position is right. If that is said repetitively so that everybody is tired of hearing it, there is less space for those dissidents, those people who have no sense of patriotism, and those foreigners to inject misinformation that will tend to escalate and increase temperatures, such as GDF drafting people, such as more armed forces going to the Essequibo, that kind of thing, and including what you just talked about, which is videos coming out of Venezuela showing that those people are equally hyped up, equally annoyed, equally determined.
Yeah.
But when we see those views, when we see those videos, and we don't have a firm position from our own leaders, assuaging fears and saying, look, we're seeing that, but the government of Venezuela has said they have no intention to break the peace. They intend to use peaceful and lawful means. And the lawful means that we know about we are pursuing in the ICJ. And the ICJ has said, if we hear that over and over, and we hear that there is no escalation, there is no threat, there is no increase in temperature, and if we are updated all the time, we will be informed so that we are less susceptible to that kind of propaganda.
Right.
And that alone is something that can be done and is not being done.
Okay, I'm gonna stick on a word that you just used. That I'm gonna be the devil's advocate here. You said that Venezuela is stated in the ICJ that they're going to use legal, peaceful means, okay, in order to carry out whatever they're trying to carry out, which is as you well, not annexed, but to what's the word?
No, well, I'm sorry. Again, to me, it's one thing to say we have a referendum and people turned up and they voted on these 7 resolutions or 8 resolutions.
Right.
It is quite another thing to say, now we're rolling up our sleeves and we're implementing. They're two different things.
But once the referendum is done, do they have a choice but to roll up their sleeves and do it? How does the Venezuela government now after a referendum in which the public has voted yes, all of these questions, we basically want to take control of Essequibo. How does the government then say, you know what, we changed our mind, we don't want to do that anymore? Aren't they forced, aren't they legally obligated to act?
Well, if you read the referendum, as I was saying, it talks about the desirability of doing something, the wish to do something, the interest of the Venezuelan people to do something. Okay. But it doesn't say that by 8 o'clock tomorrow, 10,000 soldiers will be there. So the language was very carefully done. And this also is a point that our leaders need to make, having analyzed the content of the referendum, to say to us, look, this thing does not mean.
But hold on, I don't think that's fair to say though, Tim, because my question again will be, what are they doing the referendum for if not to take over Essequibo? What is the point of it? If you're saying that the language it can be manipulated either side, then
I didn't say it could be manipulated either side. I said that our leaders need to examine the language and inform us so that we're not stuck in a position where we simply don't know and our people are increasingly uneasy. And they're increasingly uneasy because there is an apathy in our leadership about providing information and providing solid, repetitive, consistent, constant information so that everyone knows what's going on.
Right. But I think what we're doing is, I think in this conversation, we dropped 2 steps back, where all of this information has already been put forward. The government has already gone to the ICJ.
I don't agree, because I would challenge you personally, Kian, to tell me what the referendum says.
No, when I say what the referendum says.
No, the reason I say that is because your question is, well, after the referendum, are they bound to do it?
Right.
So you just inject 2 abstracts, they and it. What is it that they are bound to do?
Okay.
Unless we have our leaders inform us in very clear detail what the referendum is about, then we are feeling around in the dark, and fear is growing because there's this unclear view.
But I'm going to ask you a very tough question now, Tim, because what you're basically stating to me here is that your professional opinion is that this referendum is not a threat to Guyana.
Not at all. I didn't say that at all. What I said is that Guyanese are nervous because our leaders have not given us information.
Right, but if the information that you are stating should be clearly explaining what the referendum is asking the Venezuelan people, then you're saying that there is a possibility that the referendum means that they are not going to take control of Essequibo.
Let me put the issue on the other foot.
All right.
Kian Jabour, who lives in Georgetown, is invited by the government to vote at a referendum, and Kian Jabour goes to vote that Pomeroon belongs to Guyana, and we must take Pomeroon. Kian Jabour then goes back home. There's a very big gap between Kian Jabour with his white collar going with his pen and writing down something on a piece of paper, and somebody physically going with camouflage and guns to take Pomeroon. That's the point I'm making. So all of those hyped up people you see walking through the city of Caracas with t-shirts is propaganda. And our government needs to say, none of those people that you see who are elderly, who are children, who are overweight, who are unfit, some may have heart disease, that are vibrant and feeling that they're right and wearing a t-shirt, they will go and vote at a referendum. But none of them represent any real meaningful camouflage coming over the boundary. That's something else. So what does the referendum say, and what can we expect?
Okay.
That's
I'm gonna be, and I know this will lend to your conversation, to your argument on what the situation is. But we're dealing right now where, as you have said, due to the government's lack of information, they've created a vacuum in which there's a lot of unease in the Guyanese society.
Propaganda, false information, fear, and unease. Yes.
Right. So we've been seeing videos and videos that are unsubstantiated. We don't know what part of the world they are. We don't know anything along the lines of whether or not Venezuelans military is actually, on the border. There has been a claim that the government has substantiated that Venezuela was building an airstrip very close to the border. That has been substantiated. All right. They've stated, I know the Venezuelans did respond, that airstrip was being built for illegal mining purposes to monitor the area, etc. All right, and then they've sent in their personnel to deal with things going on their side of Essequibo, on their side of the border. So if we are to right now look at the information that there is on face value, correct me if I'm wrong here, your opinion is that all that needs to occur at this point in time, or all that can occur for that matter, is the government giving us real-time information on what is occurring, but are not doing that.
I'm saying that that's the first thing the government needs to do. They need to keep us informed, and they need to fill all the vacuum that exists, all the scope for misinformation, for propaganda, for these fake videos, for these old videos, the things that excite attention and increase fear and escalate tensions. The government needs to be filling that gap, filling that vacuum with genuine information, and information which points out what our strengths are, what our arguments are, what we are doing, and maintains that the solution to this thing has to be peaceful.
And in the end of the day, the truth is whether or not it's a real threat.
Yes.
Because at this point in time, other than the video circulating on social media, we don't have any factual proof that Venezuela is actually threatening Guyana. Because in your professional opinion, the wording of the referendum can easily be there to mean not particularly taking over Essequibo?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Tell me.
The referendum gives the government of Venezuela a flexibility. So they could say, people have approved it and we go in. Or equally they could say that people have approved it, so we will offer.
But then don't you have to assume the threat is real? If they can do that?
Kian, you want to make an assumption that escalates tensions?
Well, that I hear you, and I know that's the narrative that you're
every time
stating.
I hear someone, as you just said, the Venezuelans built an airstrip next to the border. And you hear that, and tensions increase, and fears increase, and temperature goes up. And every time the temperature goes up, you move closer to a situation that you don't want. Because guess what? Guyana got plenty of airstrips near to that same border, and we use them all the time. So we fly in, we fly miners in and equipment in, we fly miners out and equipment out. We do it all the time. In fact, we have been using the Cayuni River, that's a river between us. So I hope I'm right. Wouldn't like to be wrong on a public show. But that we use that historically to get cheap Venezuelan fuel that the miners use in those areas. So we use it. We are there. We are mining there. We had a story in Essequibo with Vilvoorden the other day, remember? When the rice mill was accused of breaking environmental protection rules and causing a nuisance to neighbors. Guyana is physically inescapable. We have farmers up and down the Pomeroon River historically growing coffee. They used to grow things like cotton. Now they got coconut going on. When we talk about annexation and we talk about occupation and we talk about off control, we fly to Mabaruma from Ogle daily, carrying equipment and bringing back equipment. We have villages, Amerindian indigenous villages and other villages and mining camps throughout Region 1. We bring timber from Region 1. We export from the Pomeroon going to Trinidad. The currency that they use in Regions 1 and 2 is Guyana dollars. The language they speak is English.
Right.
When you have elections, they all go and vote. This control is Guyana control since before the 1960s. Do we need at this stage to get hyped up because some anonymous person has abused the vacuum of information on social media by saying they got an airstrip that the Venezuelans put near to the border?
All right. All right. I have
Does that help?
No,
you see, I don't want anyone to say Jonas is saying that there's no threat. Of course there's a threat.
Okay.
But what I want people to understand is that any word, any action that escalates takes you a step closer to the gunfight. And if there's a gunfight, Guyana's dead. Therefore, we have to stay calm. We have to speak rationally. We have to keep our people informed. The government is failing to do that. We have to provide a platform that people don't go on Facebook to get anonymous information from other sheep who got anonymous information and spreading propaganda and misinformation all over the place. We need a solid source that everybody knows is government approved, and this is where the government is putting their information, disseminating it, not just government, but informing the opposition so that the opposition can disseminate the same information so that people know. If they want to know what's going on, they click. Just like in the morning, I click on Al Jazeera because I want to know what's going on in Palestine and Israel. There must be something like that you click and you know you get real, live information from our government, authenticated and approved by our leaders. Or else we will continue to be victims of misinformation and propaganda from anonymous sources that will cause more harm than good.
Okay. You have said this multiple times here already. And I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. And I'm not trying to fearmonger here. I come at it as a Guyanese that understands that we have an extraordinary amount of wealth in Essequibo. It's the breadbasket of our country by far and above. It's now even more so a contentious area with our huge oil finds. Again, something that Venezuela has contended for a very long time, stating that we should not even be working out in the oil blocks outside of the Essequibo region because that belongs to them. Again, all of this ties into that. Now, as a leader, hypothetically as a leader of this country, now if you have those type of resources, if you have that kind of responsibility to the people, should not more be done to ensure that it is protected? Again, this is the second time I'm saying it. If I win the lottery and all of a sudden I got plenty money, much like we've won the oil lottery off the shores of Essequibo, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build the walls to my house higher because I have to put more security in place because I now have something even more valuable that people are going to come and want to take. And we see it happen all over the world, all the time.
Okay.
So is this not just a matter of the Guyanese public being as worried as they are due to a lack of preparedness?
Okay, let me answer that. Because I hear people criticizing the government for not being prepared militarily. And that's nonsense. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That is rubbish. You talk about building a fence. 40 years ago, in the 1980s, Venezuela was buying F-16s from the United States. F-16s are fighter jets. Venezuela has an active Air Force. Now, Ignore the fact that it got a standing army of over 100,000. How high your fence gotta be to protect you from a fighter jet flying over here? What on earth can Guyana do? What do we have to do to protect us against an army of over 100,000 and fighter jets and tanks? Venezuela ranks, I think, 15th or something like that in the West in terms of armed power strength. We are down at the bottom. How high your fence gotta be? People got to stop talking about this. That conversation itself is inflammatory and escalate. People got to stop talking nonsense trying to criticize the government for not being prepared. You cannot be prepared for this. There's nothing 750,000 people can do in a gunfight. Not in this case. I'm sorry. So stop that conversation because it is inflammatory. Console yourself with the fact that legally speaking we are right, that the international community must recognize we are right, that CARICOM recognizes we are right, as wishy-washy as that nonsensical statement came from a couple of the Caribbean nations. The fact is none of them are going to come to help, so that's tough. But similarly, Brazil's not going to help, US is not going to help. Stop directing your mind to some kind of military activity. You lose. We are right legally, we are right ethically. The arbitration of 120 years has stood sacrosanct and is respected, and the ICJ has said it has jurisdiction, and there will be one end result. Unless we do some foolishness, there will be one end result from the International Court of Justice. Now, I think that one of the problems we have is that Guyanese inherently know, they know deep down, that there are serious doubts about the competence of their leadership on both sides. It's all well and good when you're quarreling with the other side inside Guyana. You know, the song says, we may quarrel among ourselves, but not a blade of grass, when people with foreign faces from different places come. So we quarrel among ourselves very happily, knowing that the stakes aren't high, and we are both Indo and Afro content in this foolish quarrel that we have, us or them, family and friends, us or them. But guess what? That means we deserve what we get. So now, having ignored issues of competence, issues of social needs, education needs, health needs, the system that we should have, we are reaping what we sowed, having sown 60 years of ethnic divisive politics that ignores competence. And those people in Essequibo who voted how they voted have no real faith in the competence of their leadership. And that's a problem. Our leadership have to step up on both sides, government and opposition. But the fact is, it's the government that has to start to create a platform for information, to inform people what this referendum does, what the possibilities are, to remind people that Venezuela has said that it's a peaceful nation, to remind people that we have the right of it and why we have the right of it, and that we are going through the International Court of Justice. To explain to the people, and I hope this wasn't a mistake, this move to the International Court of Justice to get some interim temporary order preventing the referendum, because I'm not sure that's going to work. And this goes to propaganda, because if the ICJ doesn't give us that interim order, can you imagine what a mountain Venezuela will make of that in the propaganda machine, that they must have a problem putting out information knowing that the easy answer is, why you didn't come to the ICJ? Why you're not allowing an impartial adjudicatory body to decide the right and wrong of this thing? Why you bullying? But if they get a little whiff, a little whisper of success, even on this kind of interim application that's being made, they can make a mountain of that in terms of propaganda. And again, this takes me back to competence. I hope that our leaders are doing the right thing. I hope that they're following advice from the best experts that they have found. But at the end of the day, what they need to do to help the Guyanese people and assuage their fears and calm things down and prevent false information, they need to fill the gap by information, by providing a platform where everybody can go to be informed all the time on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour, minute-by-minute basis.
Excellent. I I think much like many of you, we take a lot of this information in, and very often, sometimes you need to look at things from a very different perspective. And I can tell you, as for one, somebody that's young and, obviously, much more emotionally tied to these types of situations, not more emotionally tied, but obviously more emotional about certain things, and, don't have the wisdom to sit down and look at things, from every single aspect. And again, more so from your professional side, because I would have to respect your opinion as somebody that, on very much significantly smaller scales deals with contentious matters like this all the time.
I don't know that it's professional expertise, Kian. We've all grown up and gone to school and we all see what happens in a schoolyard.
Mm-hmm.
And when a bully fights the little kid, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. The little kid gets his ass kicked.
Right.
And right now, Guyana's the little kid.
Right.
So it must not get to a fight, because guess what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And any escalation
That's key.
takes you closer to a fight. And
if the little kid picks up a stick, he can get beat even worse.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And he needs to know, the little kid needs to know that he needs to discuss rationally, calmly, putting his point of view across respectfully, because if he does not, the end result is the same.
Right.
And that's where we are.
Interesting. I will, just throw another aspect of, again, lack of preparedness that I'd like to speak about is, I think personally more can be done with the international community on this matter. I know a lot of people, as you and I have, had our conversation, nobody is sending their troops to die for Guyana, right? And I know that's how you personally feel. Whether when the time comes, again, more so to information dissemination from our government, I think another way to ease the people can be to actively show or have open discussion with international communities that may be able to assist if things were to escalate. I think people in their desperate moment are looking for any sort of comfort. I know you're of the opinion Brazil will not get involved. NATO, the UN, America, Britain, nobody's touching this with a pole.
Well, I hear you, and I agree with you that there needs to be an outreach to our larger neighbors.
Yeah.
The arbitration award of 1899 was done at the instance of the Americans.
Right.
And the Americans passed through Congress a resolution that Great Britain must come to that arbitration and abide by the arbitration outcome, and that they would ensure that it happens by any means necessary.
Okay.
Now, if the United States of America imposed that arbitration, participated in the arbitration, do you know that an American president was actually present at the arbitration and I think represented the party?
So I understand.
So if they were there and they insisted on the process,
right,
how on earth do they sit quiet now that the state that insisted on that process and petitioned them and lobbied them for 50 years between 1830 and the 1890s to have this arbitration is now walking away from the arbitration, and they sit back and do nothing?
Yeah.
I think the point needs to be made very firmly that this is a process that started under you, and you said by any means necessary this arbitration has to take place and the award has to be obeyed. And now we are saying to you, we've obeyed it, we followed it, we went through, we inherited from Great Britain, and we adhere to the Schomburg line. Where are you? And how is it that in the face of this, you are having discussions with Maduro, you are exercising leniency and opening lines of communication, but we are not seeing any comfort?
Yeah.
Is that what your foreign policy is about? Is there no ethical position, no consistency? What's going on? And I think that needs to be said. I think with Brazil, the Brazilians had said long ago that they recognize that boundary and that they feel that Venezuela needs to remember that they had asked for and agreed to be bound by the 1899 arbitration. And I think an inquiry can be made of Brazil if they aren't willing to make a statement about any possible about the need to maintain peace and the need to adhere to international law and the need to, having accepted the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, to conform with the procedures of that court, to go along with what's happening, to argue your case, and to abide by any decisions that that court arrives at, because that is what happens in a modern civilized world.
Right.
There is no other way to solve this problem, and as long as Venezuela agrees, as they have done, that they are a nation that observes peace and that upholds the peace, then the solution has got to be an impartial adjudicatory body, and the International Court of Justice is that body. And that is the point that needs to be made, and I don't see any nation around the world taking a different point of view. And we need to be extending feelers, asking for support in that regard. And I will say I'm disappointed with the response that we've had from some Caribbean nations. It's been tepid, but hopefully it will improve, and hopefully our leaders, who have to demonstrate some kind of competence at this stage, are making those inquiries and having those discussions. But I say hopefully, I say I hope, I say maybe, because there is no platform where information is available to Guyanese, and there should be. All that is out there right now is misinformation, ghosts, rumors, smoke, mirrors, whispers, and fear. And that is an untenable situation.
Excellent. Excellent. I definitely have no aspect of this that I can disagree with. I can come with my, man on the street conversation and our worry, but it all will eventually stem back to the fact that there is not enough information to ease the public's fears. And this is what all of this is stemming from. So we are calling on the government that this is your time to show your competence and leadership in telling the Guyanese people what you are doing, what the plan of action is, and how we will be going about ensuring the safety of Guyana. This is critical. At least we know that there will be a plan in place. We know what the strategy is, as Tim said, dissemination of information, and ease of tensions, and a lack of any threatening action to escalate the situation should be the first and foremost strategic plan in dealing with this matter.
Thank you, and I agree. And finally, I hope not to hear a repetition that our military leaders are saying publicly that they are ready to defend Guyana. That is an escalation. That is not the discussion.
Because that implies that there is an impending threat.
It's not the discussion we need to be having, and I promise you, it doesn't give any Guyanese comfort. I'm not comforted.
There we go. On that note, guys, it is already 9:30. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here on this lovely Friday evening. I know a lot of you guys take your time out. I've been getting a lot of feedback, which I really, really appreciate. You guys can reach out. There's numbers on the screen there. You can WhatsApp that number anytime, and I'll do my best to respond. We should be back here next Friday as usual. I'd like to encourage everybody to please be safe out there. We know what happens in Guyana on our roadways these days. It's honestly probably more of a threat right now than Venezuela on what is occurring on the streets here in Guyana when it comes to road safety. So please, everyone, it's Friday evening. Have a great weekend, and we will be back here next week with you. Thank you. This is aPolitically Incorrect. My name is Kian Jabour. I will see you next week. Take care.